2,184 needles, 6,552 finger pricks, 1,820 carbohydrate calculations, 25 vials of blood, 36,000 units of insulin, and more than $10,000. These are a few stats of just what 1 year looks like for a type 1 diabetic. And although about 4 million Americans have diabetes, only about 5% have type 1 diabetes, making only 0.3% of Americans with this disease. Type 1 diabetes is an autoimmune disease that attacks the pancreas and prevents it from producing insulin. Insulin is a hormone that helps the sugar in your body be used for energy. Without insulin, the sugar builds up in the bloodstream and slowly damages the entire body. It is not known what caused type 1 diabetes, and there is no cure. I am part of this 0.3%, and I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes at age 8 and lived with it for almost 10 years. Because the disease is so rare and often confused with type 2 diabetes, not many people understand what type 1 diabetics must do every single day just to survive. Type 1 diabetes is a life-threatening disease. Therefore, individuals with type 1 diabetes must manage it every single day, including regularly checking their blood glucose, injecting insulin into their bodies, and urgently managing high and low blood glucose. First, I will describe why type 1 diabetics check their blood glucose. Second, I will explain insulin and why type 1 diabetics need insulin and need to use insulin many times each day. And third, I will discuss why it is the essentials that type 1 diabetics manage high and low blood sugars and what kind of actions they need to take when they are high or low. Type 1 diabetics must check the amount of glucose in their blood. You might wonder, what is glucose and why is it important to check it? Well, according to the U.S. National Laboratory of Medicine, blood glucose or blood sugar is the main sugar found in your blood. Blood glucose comes from the food you eat. It is the body's main source. It is also the main source of energy in the body. Your blood carries glucose or the body's energy source to all of the body cells to use for energy. So how do you check the level of glucose in the blood? The American Diabetes Association states that monitoring blood glucose is the most important part of managing type 1 diabetes. People with diabetes can check their blood sugar with a glucose meter. They must wash their hand or arm and then insert a test strip into the meter. Then using a sharp, pointy needle, they have to poke their fingertip or arm, called a lancet, to then draw blood. Then touch the edge of the test strip with the drop of blood and wait for the blood to be absorbed by the test strip. Sometimes if there is not enough blood, you have to constantly prick or stab the part of your body to get more blood. Finally, the amount of sugar in your blood will appear on the meter's display, and it is measured in milligrams of sugar per deciliter of blood. People with diabetes also check their blood sugar by using a CGM or continuous glucose monitor. According to the National Institute of Diabetes, a CGM works through a tiny sensor injected under the skin and measures the glucose level in the fluid between your cells. The CGM automatically tracks blood glucose levels with the sensor throughout the day and night and sends the information to a monitor to be read at any time. Now that we've covered what type 1 diabetes is and how important it is for diabetes to check their blood, let's talk about the statistics from my introduction. In order to stay alive, we must inject into my body more than 36,000 units of insulin per day. So what is insulin and why do type 1 diabetics need it? According to the Hormone Health Network, insulin is a hormone necessary for the body to be able to use sugars as energy. As you eat, the pancreas releases insulin, which takes glucose from the bloodstream and puts it into the body's tissue, tissues used for energy. Insulin works like a key to a lock in every human cell. When the glucose is accompanied by insulin, the insulin unlocks the cell and lets the sugar go into the cell to be used as energy. For a typical type 1 diabetic, the pancreas does not produce insulin, so there is no key to get the sugar into the cells. So the sugar just builds up in the blood, and the sugary blood damages the body. So how do type 1 diabetics get insulin, and how much do they need? The American Diabetes Association describes that taking insulin as insulin therapy. A syringe is the most common form of insulin delivery. Insulin can only be absorbed through the body through fat cells, which is usually done in the stomach, hip, or back of the arm. The American Diabetes Association also states that insulin should be injected into the same general area each time, but it cannot be injected into the exact same place since insulin cannot be absorbed through scar tissue. This is particularly challenging for type 1 diabetes who have been managing the disease for a long time, like me, because then you start to run out of places to put the needles. Again, because type 1 diabetics' body do not make insulin, it must be injected every time you eat, so it can immediately progress the glucose that comes from the food. That means for every glass of milk, every banana, every piece of toast, every cup of yogurt, every bite of watermelon, I need to inject insulin. Some people may think that taking insulin is a cure for diabetes. However, insulin is not a cure. In fact, it is merely life support. In addition to needing to take insulin every time you eat, type 1 diabetics also have to calculate how much insulin to eject. The amount of insulin is determined by how many grams of carbohydrates are in the food. The Diabetes Education and Research Center states that type 1 diabetics must consult with a doctor to determine their insulin to carb ratio. Therefore, after counting many grams of carbohydrates in a meal, such as 13 grams for a cup of milk, 20 grams for a piece of bread, 15 grams for an apple, and so on, type 1 diabetics must mathematically determine how many units of insulin they need. For me, those 88 grams of carbohydrate would mean injecting 12 units of insulin. So you might be thinking, well, that doesn't sound too bad. Just check your blood, do a little math, and give yourself a shot. No big deal. It actually still is a really big deal, because what happens when the blood sugar doesn't turn out exactly right? Well, what happens if you're high because you have a cold, or too low because you just finished PE class? Type 1 diabetics must still get ready to take urgent action to correct high or low blood glucose. What happens to type 1 diabetics when blood glucose is low? Low blood sugar, or hypoglycemia, occurs when the amount of blood in the sugar drops below 70 milligrams per deciliter of blood. According to the Center of Disease Control, there are many causes for hypoglycemia. Taking too much insulin, not eating enough carbs for how much insulin you take, the timing of when you take your insulin, the amount of timing of physical activity, how much fat, protein, and fiber are in your meal, hot or humid weather, unexpected changes in your schedule, spending time at a high altitude, or going through puberty. The symptoms of low blood sugars are serious. They include a fast heartbeat, shaking, sweating, nervousness or anxiety, irritability or confusion, dizziness, and hunger. Type 1 diabetics must act quick to overcome low blood sugar. If hypoglycemia is left untreated, a type 1 diabetic can slip into a diabetic coma, which can cause permanent brain damage or even death. To treat hypoglycemia, type 1 diabetes must drink or eat sugary food or inject glucagon immediately. This is why it is important to me to have juice boxes or candy with me at all times. It's not just because I like to eat a snack. So what happens to type 1 diabetics when their blood sugar is high? The high blood sugar, or hyperglycemia, occurs when the amount of sugar in the blood is more than 200 milligrams per deciliter of blood. According to the Mayo Clinics, there are many causes for hypoglycemia. Insulin absorption, problems absorbing insulin, illness or surgery or trauma, skipping insulin doses, high adrenaline. The symptoms of high adrenaline. The symptoms of high blood sugar are serious. They include increased thirst, frequent irritation, fatigue, nausea or vomiting, shortness of breath, stomach pain, dry mouth, and rapid heartbeat. High blood sugar can quickly cause ketoacidosis, which happens when the sugar in the blood can't get into the body cells, and the body starts to break down stored fat for energy. This process forms toxic acid into the blood called ketones. If left untreated, it can cause severe vomiting and a coma. Ketoacidosis requires emergency care, including an IV of fluids and insulin. Trust me, it is not fun. In conclusion, I would like to review my main points of what type 1 diabetics must do every day to survive the disease. Type 1 diabetics must check their blood glucose many times a day. Type 1 diabetes must inject insulin to their bodies many times a day. And type 1 diabetics must urgently care for high and low blood sugars every day. As you can see, people with type 1 diabetes must give the disease careful attention every day with no days off. So next time you see someone poking their finger or arm or injecting a needle into their stomach, don't go running to the Department of Drug Busters. Instead, give them a thumbs up and offer them a juice box. You never know when you could be preventing a coma.